Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today, as we're going to be talking about a really important issue, something that we're seeing that's affecting all of our cities, this entire nation. It is destroying our nation, our society, and it's growing. It is growing at an immense rate. It's very troubling. And we're going to explain exactly what we mean in detail in just one second. But first, we want to say that if this is the first time that you're seeing our channel, we want to welcome you and we thank you for joining us. We do long-form political commentary here. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, on DLive, basically all the social media that the internet overlords will allow, to reach out to you from anywhere and everywhere in the world to ask you to send us your tweets, your chats, your phone calls, to tell us what you think, because we believe in the First Amendment. Not just because of Americans, but for everyone, because it is an inalienable right to be able to speak freely. Not everyone can, but we encourage it, and we hope that you will join us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to have that expression of free speech, to tell us what you think about the issues that are affecting us all. Now, with that said, I want to take a moment and mention to you that this free speech is in danger. Our channel is in danger. We have just received a notification today, July 21st, from YouTube. They have already gone back a month in time. They took away and they've removed some of our content, and we believe that will not be the last time they have done this. They are on the process of trying to delete us, to remove our voice, to remove your voice from being able to be seen publicly because of their political preferences. That's a shame, because free speech should mean and does mean that you are free to speak. And our answer to them is we're not going to stop. In fact, we're going to keep going, and we're going to talk about what's going on right now in America, because we're seeing that everyone's freedom is being attacked because of the Black Autonomy Act. The DC Black Autonomy Act is what we're going to be talking about today. You probably haven't heard about it, and you may not be familiar with it. And I'm pretty sure that YouTube, Facebook, the progressive movement, BLM, they don't want you to know about this. So let's go into this. And first of all, actually, where is this all coming from? Where are we getting these ideas from? Well, they come from a while ago. This isn't new. In fact, we heard Governor Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo, on January 8th of 2020, as reported by the New York State of Politics, stated that New York is the progressive capital of the nation, and we must fulfill that destiny. That's what we're looking at. That's one of the things we're facing right now. Progressive movement looks at itself as if it is manifest destiny that they will take over the United States. They have New York, they have Illinois, they have Michigan and California, and they are spreading to other states, infecting individuals, to say the least, with their ideology. Now, you may think it's a good ideology, that's fine, but it isn't, or it may not be, based on some of the things that we see as a result of this. And we want to explain that with you, and we want to hear what you have to say about it, because we want to explain why Governor Cuomo is wrong. Not only is New York not the progressive capital, not only is it not in California, progressivism is a problem. And it has a lot of different ways that it affects people. And we see often that their leaders are less than the best leaders. In fact, it's Governor Cuomo who's currently sitting with 9 sexual assault allegations against him, even though this is the time of Me Too, and it seems to have no impact on him. It's Governor Cuomo who admitted that he lied to the public about the death of 16,000 citizens that he caused, and he lied to the public. He covered it up. These are crimes. It is a criminal action, and he has admitted it. His office has admitted that this has happened. So the progressives really don't have much to show for this. But they aren't done. Their leaders are making one set of actions, like we see with Governor Cuomo and Whitmer and Newsom, but we're also seeing individuals taking actions at lower levels of government as well. Now, I do want to give credit where credit is due. We first ran into the story from Tim Pool, who is bringing this up in his video today, July 21st. And then we looked into it, and we want to get into what this is about, because essentially, Addison Sarder is an individual who ran for city council in Washington, D.C. And he came up on March 8th of 2021, he came up with his DC Black Autonomy Act, or what he calls the DC African American Autonomy Act. And we're going to talk about this in a second. But what he is looking for is essentially segregation. He wants to segregate the city of Washington, D.C. into a black and white zone. Now, you may ask, well, if you're separating it that way, wouldn't there also be a Hispanic zone? Wouldn't there be a Chinese zone? Where does that end? How many zones would there be? How many independent cities would there be? He doesn't address that because he doesn't care. Addison is looking at this from the point of view that, well, black people can only be the people who deal with black people, and therefore they have to have an autonomous zone. They have to be separate because separate is equal in the view of BLM, in the view of Addison Sarder. Now, that's an idea you may have heard before. Segregation is equal but separate. In fact, we've had this in front of the Supreme Court before. It was an idea in the 1960s when we saw the civil rights movement, and it was struck down by the Supreme Court. Segregation is not positive. It is not separate and equal. It is just separate. It is just racist. But individuals in the progressive movement don't want you to think about that. They don't want you to consider that. In fact, they have been working very carefully for many, many years to convince people that segregation is a good thing because they changed the name. They don't call it segregation anymore. You've probably heard it called safe spaces. We've covered this on this program before. Coming from the Huffington Post, as a matter of fact, on May 18th of 2015, 6 years ago, they were talking about safe spaces, areas that white people can't be allowed into, that people of different ethnicities aren't allowed into because they're just less than, they are separate, they are the wrong category. And see, this is where this all comes down to, because you're no longer human according to the progressive mantra, the BLM Antifa ideology. No, what they're looking at is you are a checkbox. You are no more than the attributes you were born with. You're male or female, or perhaps you're trans. You are straight or gay or something separate. But these are inherent facts about you. You are black or white or Hispanic or Asian. And these are immutable, but they are separate, and they are intrinsically who you are. It's not about what quality of person you are. It is about the obvious traits, the intrinsic things that you cannot do. You're inherently black or white, male or female, Asian, and that's it. And you're not more important than that. And because of that group, you are separated, you are segregated because of that. And they want that to be the truth. And again, they've been telling this to our kids for many, many years. I want to go back to that article. So in the Huffington Post in 2015, this is where they were talking about college students who were being isolated, that they were being subjected to, at Ryerson University, they were being segregated because of their race. And the news media, the local student newspaper, were not allowed to enter these safe spaces. They weren't able to take part in an event on their college campus to inform people of this because they're the wrong color. That was the only reason, because they're the wrong color. And we see that this, one of the members, a contributor, a 4-year journalism student at Ryerson University, Amana Ansari, says, oh, no, it's perfectly good because it's, and I'm quoting here, it's not just important, it's essential for marginalized groups to have safe spaces on campus to engage with people who understand what they go through. I want you to think about that for a second, because this is the core of how we got to where we are in 2021. In 2015, students, some of them possibly, this is going back to 2011, very likely well before then, but students at Ryerson University were being told that some people are marginalized by birth, that because of the color of your skin, some people are less than. White people, by their birth, have white privilege. That makes them more than another person who isn't white. That means you are marginalized. You are less than. You are a victim. And you have no power over that because the only way that can be changed is you either have to have more power or the people who have power must give you that power. And that's their position. You are a victim and you must be helped because you can't do anything about it because the box has already been checked. You are already in a category and that category is less than. That is the core behind safe spaces. That is the core behind BLM. That is the core behind the progressive mantra. And we hear this often from individuals like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Cori Bush. We've heard this from politicians all across the spectrum, or rather, all across the country in that same singular fraction of the Democratic Party called the Democratic Socialists of America, or otherwise known as the progressive movement. They have this belief, and they believe that because you are marginalized, if you are not white, because you are less than, you need to have spaces segregated where you can go, and you will only be able to go there, and no one else can go there or speak to you about it. That's segregation. And segregation is racism. Now, it's voluntary segregation. That's because they have convinced people that this is a positive idea, that this is something that's worth doing, that you should self-segregate, that you should recognize that you are a victim and you are marginalized and separate yourself from other people. Because they think that's a positive. I think that's a power play. It seems to not make sense. In fact, we were talking about this going back in 2016. When we saw that at Binghamton University, yet another college, is teaching kids back in August of 2016. It was August 26th of 2016, where we saw that Binghamton University was teaching its faculty and its students that they should not be white, that being white is a problem, and that you must understand the diversity, privilege, and society we function within by understanding that being white is better than being anything else. Because that is the core of what they're saying. Other people have to be treated differently because they're not white. And you have to recognize that, otherwise you are a racist. And white people should be treated differently. It's a negative because they have the power. That's kind of terrifying when you think about it. And that is inherently racist. Yes, it's a reverse of the 1950s and 1930s because it's saying, well, white people are bad, but it's again saying people are intrinsically the color of their skin, not individuals. At the time, in 2016, we said how any institution of learning can claim to lift up its student body by narrowly pre-selecting their choice of paths is baffling. How can active racism be promoted in the name of diversity is laughable, were it not for the damage such racism creates. The number of ways this emulates McCarthyism far outweighs the manner it does not. Historically, the persecution of any group has always been matched by pseudoscience, misreading of religious tomes, and the endorsement of institutions of higher learning. Let's remember, you heard slavery was justified by institutions of higher learning. It was justified by misreadings of various religious texts. There was pseudoscience, phrenology, that said that it was perfectly right. Individuals who want power and are using racism and sexism as a justification will do so through whatever means they need. They will justify it so that they feel like they are doing the right thing. Just like what we are seeing now from Mr. Addison Sarder. This is about his misunderstanding and his abject racism, quite honestly. The DC African American Autonomy Act. It's segregation. He's trying to put people into a box based on the color of their skin, and that's all that matters, and to give certain select people power within that region for his or for their benefit of that political group, regardless of what individuals think or want. It is racism. And this racism tends to come from the progressives. And we've seen it in many forms, but the most common one in 2021 and 2020 was, of course, the autonomous zones. Now, you may remember this. We've seen autonomous zones in Atlanta, attempted in Atlanta, in Austin, Seattle, Portland, but it was also in Washington, D.C., as you can see here from the video on June 23rd of 2020. And we know this was true because this was something that was covered by Newsweek magazine on June 26th of 2020, that there was the attempt to create a Black House autonomous zone. Now, one thing about these autonomous zones we have to remember, in every single case, everywhere we have ever seen an autonomous zone, we have seen certain things that are absolutely true. Autonomous zones, by their definition, by what they do, they violate every city, state, and federal law, always, every single one of them. We've gotten evidence now, we've seen it for a year. Every single time there is an autonomous zone, they violate local, state, and federal laws. They are, by definition, zones of treason. They are treasonous zones because they break every law and wish to put in their own laws and their own leaders and their own society. They are breaking away. It is treasonous and it is indefensible. It is something you cannot argue is not being done. That is the fact that we have seen, reported by CNN, CBS, NBC, CNN, every news media. We've seen the result. They may call it mostly peaceful as arson is ongoing, as we're watching cities be burned down that will take decades to replace, that will destroy cities. You think I'm wrong about this? Okay, let's take a look at Seattle, which had one of the more popular autonomous zones. And this was as of July 30th in 2020. July 30th in 2020, they had already realized that there was over $1 million of damage in the city of Seattle. Damage that would take decades to correct, decades to fix. As a matter of fact, going to Axios, we see that on September 16th of 2020, while several autonomous zones continue to exist, like the George Floyd Square autonomous zone, and we saw Portland in riots and attempting to do their autonomous zones, and Atlanta having attempted their autonomous zones, we see that Axios in September of 2020 totaled it up, and the costliest U.S. civil disorders were, number one, were the riots and the destruction of the autonomous zones that came out of 2020, the BLM movement, the Antifa movement. And I want to be clear, Axios, they are a left-leaning news source, an extremely left-leaning news source. So they want to word this as civil disorders. Let's be very clear. A protest is not a civil disorder. They're not the same thing. And more importantly, a riot is neither of the two. A riot is a crime. When you have arsons that are being committed, individuals are being killed, where individuals are being run up on and being beaten in the streets, as we have seen from video after video after video for the last year. That is a crime. That is a criminal event. Protests are peaceful. There is no comparison between what Martin Luther King did and what we're seeing from the protests in across the country on 2020. And when they say that it cost $1 billion, it cost maybe as much as $2 billion, they're thinking of the time between May 26th and June 8th. Let me give you a highlight here. Something that's important about this. Axios says it's $1 billion in just about 2 weeks' time. What they're not telling you is the CHAZ, the Seattle Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, one of the most popular and famous of the autonomous zones, didn't even get created until June 8th. So Axios literally stopped counting the moment that we started seeing autonomous zones create in the nation. And one of the most popular ones, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, which went from June 8th until July 1st, is not counted in their calculations of $1 billion of damage. They're not counting the George Floyd Square, which continued to be an active autonomous zone for more than a year. More than a year. So we have no idea the total. No one's been able to come up with the final total here. But we know that saying it's $1 billion to $2 billion is the minimum estimate for 2 weeks, not for the year. But that's why this is what we get when the left is trying to justify what they are doing. When they're trying to convince you that segregation is a good thing. When they're trying to convince you that the ultimate form of segregation, these autonomous zones, no, it's not treasonous. It's just a dispute. It is just a peaceful protest, or a mostly peaceful protest, as they show you arson and buildings burning down, and we have video of individuals that are being killed. Children, 8-year-old children, Atlanta, being killed because of the autonomous zones. They don't want to emphasize that. They want you to understand, no, this is okay. This is a good thing. And to separate people based on their color of skin, and to judge people based on the color of their skin as the only qualifying fact, that's what you should be focused on. In fact, that's what we get to hear from Mayor Lightfoot out of Chicago, who says that she will only speak to interviews with reporters of color, people who are of color. And that elicited a response from the National Association of Black Journalists, which said, quote, "Yes, it's a great public relations move at her 2-year mark. This was for getting headlines. They admit that. But it will not mean Mayor Lightfoot does not have to answer for her deficiencies, her weaknesses, as well as her accomplishments over the past 2 years." The National Association of Hispanic Journalists also jumped in. They said that the National Association of Hispanic Journalists does not condone restricting press access based on a journalist's race or ethnicity. Any action that threatens the cornerstone of our democracy and First Amendment rights is unacceptable. And that's where it is. That's the key. Because if you are restricting people based on the color of their skin, if you are segregating these people, then you could be part of that segregation too. Who are you not allowed? If we are saying that our elected leaders can only speak to people who are of the same color, because according to the BLM, the Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow, otherwise known as PLOT, the Antifa, if we're listening to people like Addison Sarder, then you can only be understood by people of the same color as you, which obviously we had a president by the name of Barack Obama who he wasn't the same color, and yet he was overwhelmingly elected. He was also re-elected, but he was different. So that seems to fly in the face of their movement towards segregation, separation, their movement of victimhood of certain people. But we have to understand, even the news media, that is somewhat promoting of what we see with Mayor Lightfoot, Mayor Lovey Warren Lovey Warren out of Rochester, Governor Cuomo, Governor Newsom, Governor Whitmer, so many others. They even recognize this is a problem. This is an essential problem of our nation. And it is being created because at its core, this segregation, whether it's voluntary or not, at every aspect of our society has a negative impact. It hurts us. It does not make us better as a nation because it dehumanizes individuals. It assumes and it requires that certain people must be a victim. They must be incapable of doing for themselves, and they must be taken care of. And the elites who get to choose how to protect or take care of those victims are always the only ones to benefit in every single case. Lori Lightfoot was looking to benefit by segregating the news media because she wanted better press, and she thought she could get it from an even smaller group of people who are then being enhanced. Their careers are being benefited by being able to have interviews exclusively with her. See, that's the problem. There's an element in this that is telling us that these people are not looking out for you and me. They're looking out for their power, and they are looking to enhance themselves by forcing you or convincing you to be voluntarily segregated. And that's the inherent problem. And they've been telling this to our kids. Let's remember 2015 of Ryerson University. Students who've been there for 4 years are confirming that this segregation, these safe spaces, this is a positive thing, that we need to separate people based on the color of their skin, because those people, depending on the color of their skin, are victims. And the other people are the bad guys just because of the color of the skin they were born with, not the color, the content and character of any of those individuals. And we see that at Binghamton University, who are persecuting people based on the color of their skin, while at the same time reinforcing you're a victim. And if you don't understand that, they are giving classes and they are giving training to teach people to understand that. And that leads us to what we see with BLM. And this is why, and this is all contained, this is all together. And this is what a lot of people aren't talking about because they're only talking about one aspect of this. We have to understand, where is this coming from? Because it doesn't end with what's going on in DC. That is a symptom of a much deeper problem. We see that this is part of the deeper problem is that we are told, well, Black Lives Matter. This is important for them. They are trying to help us. That's why they promote segregation. That's why they want separation, because they're victims of white people with their white privilege. But don't we remember as well, BLM really doesn't care about that. See, BLM, they believe in communism. They are there for communists. They were created by a communist, Patrice Cullors. She has admitted that she is a communist. She was trained in communism. That BLM was trained as a way to convert people into communism and into socialism. And BLM, the organization, came out and they recently said, Cuba is about the communists. They came out for the communists. The people of Cuba said they want a better government. They want more freedom. They want more choice. They want to be treated better. BLM came out and said, no, the communists are great. Oh, by the way, America's horrible. America, who has the medicine, has the food, has a higher quality of life, that's bad. And America should, because America, which is mostly white, should, because they're privileged, America should take their privilege. They should take everything away and give it to Cuba. Because Cuba, they're not white. They are victims. And so therefore, that victim should be given everything. That's what BLM said. Now, this is at the same time that the Cuban people are saying, that's not what we're talking about. We want freedom. We don't want communism. We've had it for 60 years. and they want freedom. They don't want a communist system. They don't want to be under a dictatorship. They don't want to be treated separate and different and segregated. Cuba isn't a safe space. Now, some of the American leaders they're saying, well, no, they're protesting because they don't have vaccines. Well, why don't they have a vaccine? Ask that question. What caused them to not have that? Because they have a bad economy, because they have a bad government, because the people aren't free, because they don't have choices. That's why. Because Cuba is not being stopped. They can go and deal with China. China has a vaccine. They can go to Russia and deal with the Russian people. They can talk to North Korea, Venezuela. There's a lot of countries besides the United States in the world. No one's stopping Cuba from doing business. It's the Cuban government. It's the communist government. It is this socialist movement that has taught them you have to be separate and to be segregated. And because you're segregated, you're going to be treated better because you're a victim. And it never happens. It's never good for the people. It's very good for Castro and the dictatorship of Cuba. It's good for Kim Jong-un and the dictators of North Korea. It's good for the former leader of Venezuela. It's good for them, but it's not good for the people, like in Venezuela, where people are eating out of dumpsters at this moment, and we see a huge amount of measles and mumps are plaguing the area, and people are running to the United States. So that brings me back again to Addison Sarder. To understand this, so we understand where this is coming from. Students have been taught this since at least 2011 in the schools, that separate is good, that it's the bigger the safe space you have, the better it is. And in that safe space, no one else can be allowed in except a specific type of people. And we have to ask the question, if we were to listen to Addison Sarder and to create a brand new city just for black people, run by a black mayor and a black city council, just for them, then we have to ask the question, what about Hispanics? Where do they go? Do they have to be in the city with the white people, even though I'm a black Hispanic? Do I get to come to that city? Or am I going to be segregated? Would I not be able to run for an elected office? What about Asians? Where would they go? Do they have to have a city for themselves? Do we have to create cities for every ethnic group, every skin color, every sexuality, every sexual preference? Do we have to keep separating because only those people can be with themselves? Because, and doesn't that sound like the racism in the 1950s? That you have to be separated, you have to be in a different place? Isn't this what was struck down by the Supreme Court? Separate isn't equal? Because that's what he's saying right now. Addison is saying separate is equal. In fact, that is the only way to do this. He says in part, and all the links will be in the description so you can read this for yourself, but he says here that autonomy is life. Segregation is life or death, that you must be separate. And he uses Dr. Martin Luther King and Mr. Malcolm X as his examples to say, well, they were talking about this directly. And I want to remind you, Martin Luther King, he had a dream. That dream was little white kids and little black kids, people together in the same society, not segregated, not separated. But he wants to tell us that Dr. King is talking about America's a colony, and we are separate, and we have to stay separate. That wasn't the message of Dr. Martin Luther King. Although Addison Sarder wants you to think that because that's what he was likely taught in his college that told him he needs to have a safe space because of the color of his skin because he's a victim. And then he goes on to say, he wants to talk about Malcolm X. And he wants to quote Malcolm X saying, oh no, Malcolm X was talking about this because of white power structures controlling economy, housing, businesses. They told us about this. Well, this is exactly what Malcolm X was actually talking about here. The white liberal is the worst enemy to America and the worst enemy to the black man. He goes on to say, the white liberal aren't white people who are for independence, who are moral and ethical in their thinking. They are just a faction of white people that are jockeying for power. That's what Malcolm X was talking about. You see, Addison Sarder doesn't want you to think, because thinking is not part of the segregation. Thinking doesn't add power to what he wants to do. He wants to segregate black people without taking into effect and into consequence, what about everyone else? And if we keep dividing, there is nothing unifying. We don't have a nation then, we have city-states. That takes us all the way back to the ancient, this is ancient times. You know, the city-state of Rome, the city-states of Greece, you know, Athens and Sparta. This is going back to ancient history. And this is what he's thinking of. And we need to create smaller and smaller groups and separations. And that that separate is equal, separation, segregation. That he's creating a safe space the size of a city. You know, that's kind of terrifying when you think about it. Because it reminds me of this image. Because what he's saying is, well, the racism 1950s, 1930s, that was bad. But now we have social justice. This is social justice. And it's a good thing because we have to separate people. We have to keep everyone separated. There is no difference. The effect is the same. And the impact is the same. It is not separate and equal. You can also see some more about this from the post-millennial. Former city council candidate to introduce ballot initiative creating African American autonomous zones. By the way, I'm black, not African American. I'm a black Hispanic. But this is what he wants to do. He wants to segregate people. He wants to separate them. This is black autonomy. Why? How is this beneficial? Let me ask in just last few moments here, how is this beneficial to anyone? How is it better to judge people based on the color of their skin rather than the character of that individual? Let's say you create this black DC. Fantastic. You created a black DC. You have a black mayor. Is that the best mayor? Because the mayor has to be black, according to Addison Sarder. So, because he's autonomous, because only black people understand black people. That's what Mayor Lightfoot has told us, that you have to have black people who understand black people. That's what we were seeing at Ryerson University and Binghamton University being taught to college students. You're black, so you have to be around black people. They're the only ones who understand you. And Addison is saying it has to be a black mayor. Okay, that is an absolute requirement. Kind of like when Joe Biden says it has to be a black vice president. Fantastic. Does that mean that's the most qualified person? What if there is an obviously better qualified person standing right next to them? What if in that community, the people recognize that there is someone who is better qualified for that job and they happen to be Hispanic, or maybe they were Asian, or maybe they're an indigenous people, an Indian, Native American Indian, or an Eskimo. What about them? Does that mean they can't get the job because they're not the right color of skin? So your city is already at a negative because you're not getting the best people. You're just getting people that fill an arbitrary, useless criteria. That sounds kind of terrifying to me. That sounds self-destructive to me. It seems to be not in the best interest of the people, but it is definitely in the best interest of the socialists. It's definitely in the progressive. They're the ideology. They're the ones who are creating this, promising people it's going to be good. It's going to be great. You're going to be happy with this. It's going to give you more and more freedom. You know who else was told that it's going to give you more and more freedom? It's going to be great. You're going to love this. It's Cuba. The Cubans were told that when they went to socialism. It's going to be better. Who was told that? The Venezuelans were told that it would be better and everyone would have a better life. You get free health care. And look at them today. That's why Bernie Sanders doesn't talk about them anymore, because They're living in the middle of the streets. Their own government is killing the Venezuelan people. People are starving and eating out of dumpsters down there because of socialism. The very same socialism that BLM has already admitted that they support, as I just showed you earlier, that they are looking for socialism and communism. That's what they're created for. That's what they believe in. And it doesn't matter if it helps the people or not. And we're looking at Addison Sarder is now offering you the same thing. He's misquoting people that many people will look up to. Malcolm X, he's a famous black man. You look up to him. Dr. Martin Luther King, famous black man. You look up to him. Let me misquote them and take them out of context for things that they did not say and they do not believe in, and use it to his advantage because he wants power. His political group wants power. And the best way they can get that power is to take out all of the other people they might have to compete with and separate and segregate and call it a safe space and say that if you don't agree, well, then you're a racist. You're the problem. You are the negative bad guy because you don't want to be separate and you don't want us to be equal. Okay, so I've made a lot of claims here and I've shown you a lot of history because it's long-form political commentary. Perhaps you think the sources are incomplete. Maybe you don't think my sources are good enough. Maybe you disagree. We want to hear what you have to say. As long as YouTube will allow us to be on, and they may remove this video, they're already removing some of our videos, while it's still available, leave your comment. And if you found something of interest in what we have said and shown you, please like it and share. Most of all, please subscribe, because more people will be able to see this and make their own comments. And together, we are expressing our First Amendment right to that free speech, that free expression. And I look forward to hearing it. And I look forward to seeing you every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I thank you, and I hope you have a great day.